Monday, everyone. For some people, it's a mindful Monday. For others, it's a motivational Monday. But if you are here with me on the Other Side podcast, you know that it is time for another episode of the Other Side podcast. My name is Janelle Villiers, and I am your host, where I love to talk about all things mental health. What is it like to be on the other side of the journey of growing and learning and bettering ourselves and really making sure that our mental health is paid attention to and looked after? So I usually have topics that either I'm inspired by through things that I'm reading, or sometimes you guys bring me topics. Please continue to do so. Put that in the chat. And then we learn about them and we grow together. I would love it if this is your first time here on the Other Side podcast. If you could just put a 1 in the chat, that way I can shout you out. And if this is not your first time, if you have been here before, go ahead and put a 2 in the chat. I love to shout out all of my returning guests who are watching with me. And Happy New Year again. If I didn't tell you before, I'm really excited to start 2025. I always know that it's kind of just feels like a new beginning, right? A fresh start. And why not have your new beginning and fresh start with focusing on your mental health? So if you're ready, say I'm ready wherever you are. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and like. If this ends up being really valuable to you, it's free. It really helps me a lot more than I can actually really describe, but it would really be great if you could do that. So let's go ahead and get to today's topic. I love today's topic because it's a little bit like last week's topic. How can we stop beating ourselves up after we make a mistake? Yeah, this is actually what I really wanted to talk about last week, but we ended up talking about some really good things first last week in terms of, the inner critic and all of that. And I think this is really important to talk about as well. And so let's get to some strategies. Let's get to some why do we even do these things? Let's talk about that first. So what are some of the hidden reasons why our brains tend to hold on to mistakes? Well, number one, it's a survival mechanism. Your amygdala is just trying to protect you. It flags mistakes as danger. And it was just trying to protect you from doing those types of things again. So it's just going to like constantly remind you of the mistake over and over and over again. It really had an evolutionary benefit because obviously if you do make a mistake, right, you want to learn from it and not do it again in the future. And so your brain is going to tell you, don't do that. It's a bad thing. Kind of like when you're a little kid and you touch something hot for the first time, it's like, ooh, don't do that again. That was a failure. Touching that thing was a failure, even though, we don't call it. It's just something that we learned, right? And it's a whole other thing we're going to get to, dressing mistakes and failures as learning opportunities, but that's a whole other thing. Okay. And so the second reason why our brain holds on to mistakes is that there's an identity that a lot of us have with the mistakes, with the failures. And we kind of say, see, I am a mistake, not I made a mistake. It's I am a mistake. Or you know what? Not that the thing that I did failed, but I am a failure. So you start to identify with what didn't work out. And once you identify with that, it is really hard to unidentify yourself as that. It takes some effort and some working through. So the identity loop is another reason why we hold on to the mistakes. And then the third reason is this false protection. We think that if we dwell on the problem that we're somehow problem solving, but the truth is we're not problem solving. We're just ruminating and just feeling worse and worse and worse about ourselves. It really is an illusion of control. It's not real. But it's an illusion. So it feels real in the moment. And so again, this is why the brain, it's hard for the brain, for some people, to let go of mistakes and not beat ourselves up. So let's get into why some traditional just move on advice, it just doesn't work, right? So one of the reasons why the just move on advice doesn't work is because when you suppress the feelings that you have, typically they only get worse, right? You need to address something. You need to be aware of it. You need to name it to claim it. You need to claim it to name. You need to name it to tame it. You need to name it to tame it. You've heard me say this more than once before. Awareness is key. And if instead of being aware and sitting in whatever feelings you have and just like letting them pass through you. If you suppress it and try to hold it back and think that you're moving forward and you never really address it, it's only going to pop up at another time, and probably at a time where you don't want it to. So suppression doesn't really work. The next thing I think, the next reason why the just move on doesn't work is because when you skip the reflection part, it actually prevents the learning. So if you're just like, oh, just move on, but you don't like sit and think about like how you could do better, you're not going to learn anything. And that doesn't work. It's not, that doesn't help, right? And then finally, the just move on just makes us feel a lot of shame about our feelings, right? So if we do have feelings, it's like, oh, now I have feelings. I'm bad because I have feelings. Or like the mistake is I'm a mistake compounded by the fact that I have all these feelings around it, right? So this is why it doesn't work, because shaming your feelings is never going to work. Because guess what? We're human beings and we have feelings for everything. All right. So let's talk about some techniques that we can use to release this self-punishment that a lot of times we do. And number one is a compassion reset. Let's start speaking to ourselves as if we were talking to someone we love. Imagine we spoke to ourselves as if we were talking to someone that we love, which then goes to say like, well, then you're saying, Janelle, that I don't really love myself. Otherwise, I would talk differently to myself. And the answer is yes. I am saying that. I am calling you out on that. If you spoke to yourself like someone you love, you wouldn't be saying the things that you're saying to yourself in your head that no one else hears but you. So speaking like you are speaking to someone that you love, and creating self-forgiveness rituals, using touch, self-soothing gestures are all really helpful for a compassion reset. The second powerful technique to release the self-punishment is creating like a perspective in terms of the timeline. Viewing the mistakes from your future self is a big, 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 big way to like really reshift the self-punishment. Recently, shout out to Ben Parvey. He was on Say That channel. We interviewed him. Ben, I gotta get you on this podcast. But I am doing Ben's 8-week course called Thrive in 25. And one of the first assignments that he gave us on the first week was write a letter from yourself 10 years from now to yourself today. So I'm 43 years old right now. So it was like, write a letter as if I am my 53-year-old self writing to my 43-year-old self. And the amount of compassion for yourself that comes from that is huge. The understanding like this temporary feeling, understanding that these mistakes you're having are so fleeting, but or actually help you in learning or get you closer to where you really want to be. All of that becomes very, very clear. And so creating a time perspective is super helpful. And the third way that you can try to create a method to release yourself from the self-punishment is a growth reframe. So converting mistakes into learning opportunities. But again, you can't do that unless you acknowledge the fact that you even made a mistake and then sit in that. What does that feel like for you? Acknowledge the feelings and then saying, okay, I'm having some feelings about this, but let's look at what happened. Again, you're reflecting on what happened. You're not moving forward until you reflect. So that way you can see what you can learn from the mistakes. Finding the gift in every failure is a huge sign, I believe, of emotional maturity. So we're all working on being better at that and doing better at that. And finally, I wanted to go over how you can actually learn from mistakes without dwelling on it. That's the key, right? So number one is you can have a very structured reflection method. This could include setting a specific time limits for the processing that you want to do, maybe journaling. You use some journal prompts to help you with that. But basically, these journal prompts should be focused on learning. And then you want to create a very clear action plan for what you're going to do next. Now that you've reviewed what you've done and you've thought about it, you've thought it through, you're going to really want to create clear action steps. Very, very helpful. So that's a more structured reflection method that I think could be really helpful. So that way you learn, but you don't dwell on the mistake. The second tip that you can do is it's what you call integrated practice. So you take the lesson as quickly as possible from whatever the mistake or the failure is, and then you immediately create new behavior patterns. So immediately you learn from it, and then then you move forward and you act differently based on what you've learned. And so you can build prevention strategies without the shame. It's literally just, you just extract the lesson very quick. What did I learn from this? Okay, moving forward, I need to do this. Okay, great. And then you just create new behaviors immediately. So that's the integration. So integrative practice is really important. And then the third way that you can really learn from the mistakes without dwelling on them is the forward focus technique. So you direct your energy towards the solution. So, right, so you're finding the solution. You all of your energy goes towards finding the solution, and then you create immediate next steps, immediate actions that you can take for the next step that you're going to do, and then actually build confidence by creating small, really small wins. Remember, we've talked about micro goals, and then actually, incorporating those small micro goals after the mistake and the lessons that you've learned. And now you're directing your energy towards the solution. If you have these little micro goals, and guess what? You actually do them. Remember, we talked about this last time. This is going to create a significant level of confidence in you. So really, really helpful tips there. Let's do a recap. I love the recaps. So the hidden reason why our brains hold on to mistakes. Number one, it's a survival mechanism. Number two, it's this identity loop. We identify with the mistake. And then number three is that it's a false protection pattern. It's not really real. It doesn't really protect us anymore. And then we talked about why the traditional just move on advice doesn't work. Number one, if you emotionally bypass the problem, it just makes it worse. You need to acknowledge your emotions. Number two, there's a missing integration step. So when you skip over the reflection and you don't integrate, then moving on doesn't help. You're bound to repeat the mistake. And then also the third reason why the just move on doesn't work is because of the shame cycle effects. Because if you just move on and you don't acknowledge your feelings, now you've just shamed yourself even having the feelings in the first place. And we all know shaming is not good. All right. So the powerful techniques that we talked about to release this self-punishment. Number one is a compassion reset. So you want to speak to yourself like you actually love yourself. Number two is a timeline perspective. So viewing your mistakes from your future self, really great idea. And then number three is having a growth reframe. So where can I learn from the things that were the mistakes that I made? Where can I learn from the mistakes that I made? And then finally, we reviewed how to actually learn from the mistakes without dwelling on them. So number one is a structured reflection method. So structured in terms of time, in terms of what you're going to be doing, and then creating action steps. Number two is integration practice. So you're going to take everything that you've learned and immediately create a new way to act in order to not do the mistake again. And then number three is a forward focus technique. So direct your energy towards forward solution finding exercises or activities. So, did you find this helpful? Are you one of those people who dwells? I know I certainly have done that. I've definitely been guilty of that. And I find these really helpful. For me, the structured reflection method is something that is really, really helpful. It forces you to reflect, to become aware, to then create, to identify what the mistake was, and then to create a behavior and action steps that you can do to integrate the new behavior that you're going to have moving forward. Really is really, really helpful. That way you don't dwell on it. And then you can finally move on. All right. Let me know if you found this helpful. Please go ahead and put a V in the comment section and let me know that you found this helpful. I certainly do. I know this time that I spend with you guys is really valuable to me for many reasons, but the number one being that I am learning along with you guys. I am not doing this alone, and this is wonderful. So thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate having you on. Hey, Nettie. Just looking over at my Instagram crew. And please, again, don't forget to like, subscribe, all the things. Oh, hey, Adam. Thanks. I'm so glad you found it valuable. And we will be back next week for another episode. Until then, take care. Bye, everyone.